Our EU to hit back at Trump with iron fist in velvet glove. After the shock of Trump's first term and spurred on by France, the EU has beefed up its trade defense arsenal. With the threat of tariffs from US President Donald Trump still hanging in the balance, the European Union has a ready-made counterattack tactic which has been carefully prepared since the Republicans' first term. This week, the US President restored the steel and aluminium tariffs he imposed worldwide during his first term, and on February 13th he announced that he would impose reciprocal tariffs on any country that imposes tariffs on US goods, which could cause huge harm to the European auto industry. The European Commission, the EU's executive body and the bloc's 27-nation trade representative, has responded by seeking dialogue. However, if the talks fail, the bloc says it is much better prepared than last time. The EU's counter-strategy is an iron fist in a velvet glove, showing flexibility and gentleness but maintaining a firm, consistent stance. Especially with a person of Mr. Trump's character, if we do not react, he will gain momentum, said Jean-Luc Demarty, who headed the EC's Trade Department during Mr. Trump's first term. We have all the tools, and we must react effectively and in a principled manner. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has vowed a firm and proportionate response to the US's 25% steel and aluminium tariffs. The EU will act to protect its economic interests. Unjustified tariffs against the EU will certainly be met. But the EU chief also extended an olive branch when she met US Vice President J.D. Vance in Paris on February 11th, in the first high-level meeting between Brussels and Washington. She called for cooperation to tackle the influx of third-party steel, describing it as a key challenge for the two historic allies. Trump cited what he called a massive trade deficit between the US and the EU as the reason for the tariffs. But it is no secret that the US imports more goods from Europe than it exports to the old continent. The EU is also a major importer of services, making big tech a potential target for European retaliation. After the shock of Trump's first term and spurred on by France, the EU has been beefing up its trade defense arsenal. The first weapon is a reform of the enforcement regulation, which allows the EU to respond if partners breach trade agreements that harm the bloc's commercial interests. Those who say the EU is not well prepared are wrong. In the last term, we prepared for exactly the scenario that is unfolding at this moment. Because we have expanded our toolkit, we can now defend our interest better, said Bernd Lange, a senior lawmaker who heads the European Parliament's Trade Committee. So, the EU's first retaliatory move may be symbolic, reinstating tariffs on 2.8 billion euros worth of politically sensitive US exports, including Levi's jeans, Harley-Davidson motorcycles and bourbon whiskey. But Brussels knows that symbolism alone will not be enough to change Mr. Trump's mind. Another possible lever is the EU's regulatory arsenal, in particular its control over US big tech. Elon Musk's ex-Twitter or Mark Zuckerberg's Meta, for example, could find themselves in the EU's crosshairs over content regulation and data sharing by tech giants with authorities. As the world's largest exporter of services, the US could be hit hard right here. Here, Brussels could impose restrictions on US consulting and financial firms, revoke intellectual property rights, further restrict data flows, or impose a digital tax on US-based platforms. March will be crucial for EU-US trade talks. Not only is the Biden-era steel and aluminum trade truce coming to an end, but by March 25, the EC will have to decide whether Alphabet, which owns Google, Apple and Meta, are complying with the Digital Markets Act, DMA. The landmark EU digital regulation, which has been a major threat to tech giants, now appears to have fully embraced the Republican president. With Trump 2.0 in mind, the European Commission has come up with a way to strike back if one of its member states is subjected to economic bullying, the anti-coercion instrument. While the tool is designed to put the EC in a dominant position, EU countries are still seeking to ensure that they retain the final say in determining whether any competitor has overstepped its bounds and how to remedy any harm. One potential scenario for deploying the tool would be if Mr. Trump were to impose tariffs to pressure Denmark into giving up control of Greenland, a strategic Arctic island. If dialogue with the Trump administration fails, the EU could activate its economic coercion tools, which include raising customs duties on specific goods, restricting access to public procurement procedures, restricting licensing or, for example, restrictions on trade in services and trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights. But ultimately, any final decision will depend on the bloc's member states, with a minimum majority of 15 of the 27 member states needing to back the proposed course of action. If that doesn't happen, there's a fundamental problem with the way the European Union works, said Ignacio Garcia Berchero, the EU Commissioner in charge of trade with the US during Trump's first term, 2017 to 2021. In other words, the EU may have equipped itself to fight the most recent trade war, not the next one that is threatening to erupt under Trump 2.0. It's time for the EC to consider adding a more powerful tool to its arsenal to prepare for the coming era of trade wars, said David Kleiman of the ODI think tank.
Former President Donald Trump responded to the European Union's potential ban on certain U.S. food imports with a characteristically bold statement. "Let them do it," Trump declared. "They're only hurting themselves if they do that." His words, delivered on February 17, 2025, as he departed the Daytona 500 after a brief 11-lap appearance, sent shockwaves through the international community. Trump's dismissive tone underscored the growing tensions between the United States and the European Union over trade. The potential ban, driven by disagreements over regulatory standards for food products, threatened to ignite a transatlantic trade war. Trump, never one to back down from a challenge, appeared unconcerned by the EU's stance, instead framing their potential actions as self-destructive. The European Union's proposed ban on certain U.S. food imports stemmed from concerns over differing regulatory standards. The EU, known for its stringent food safety regulations, expressed apprehension over the safety of certain American agricultural products, particularly soybeans. The potential ban, while presented as a matter of consumer protection by the EU, was widely seen as a bargaining chip in the escalating trade dispute. The European Commission, the executive branch of the EU, vowed to react firmly and immediately to any retaliatory tariffs imposed by the US. They argued that Trump's reciprocal trade policies were unjustified and violated international trade norms. The Commission's statement highlighted the EU's determination to protect its interests and those of its member states, setting the stage for a protracted trade battle. Central to Trump's trade strategy was his Fair and Reciprocal Plan, a policy designed to level the playing field in international trade. This plan, formalized in a memo signed earlier that week, called for the U.S. to impose reciprocal tariffs on countries deemed to have unfair trade practices. Trump cited India as an example, highlighting their high tariffs on U.S. goods, which he vowed to match. "America will no longer tolerate unfair trade practices," declared the White House fact sheet outlining the plan. The message was clear. Trump intended to use tariffs as leverage to extract concessions from trading partners and protect American interests, even if it meant risking a trade war. The EU's potential food ban was viewed by the Trump administration as precisely the kind of unfair trade practice his policy aimed to address. Trade experts cautioned that a trade war between the US and the EU could have significant economic consequences for both sides. They warned of higher prices for consumers, particularly for food products, as tariffs drove up the cost of imports. The potential disruption to global supply chains and the chilling effect on investment were also cited as serious concerns. The Financial Times, in its coverage of the escalating trade tensions, described the EU's potential ban as a Trump-style move, highlighting the tit-for-tat nature of the dispute. The newspaper questioned the wisdom of such an approach, suggesting that both sides would ultimately be worse off. As the situation unfolded, the future of transatlantic trade relations remained uncertain, clouded by the specter of protectionism and the unpredictable nature of the Trump administration's trade policies.